us three experts in the field. From the right side, we have Brother Dr. Ahmed Khan. He is a practicing psychologist and psychiatric in the area. He has his focus is on adults as well as youth. Next to him, we have Dr. Usama Abu Saud, who's also a board-certified psychiatric. And then, last but not least, our dear sister Patty Blades, who has 18 years or more of social work experience working with teams, trauma issues, and mental health issues. So inshallah, we're going to get started since we're a little behind on our schedule. We have a few questions that we're going to go over with the panelists, inshallah. Just ask each panelist just to keep it to about a minute and a half or two, so we can go through a lot, and then we'll open the floor for questions for anyone who's with us here. Also online, if you're on Facebook, you can put in the comments your questions. We have a couple of brothers who are monitoring those as well, inshallah. So inshallah, our first question for our panel relates to the increase or the frequency of young Muslim people who are drinking, especially in college and upper high school. And we've noticed that, Ilya, that the number or the frequency has increased recently over the past 5 years. And we wanted to know, is that consistent with what you're seeing in your practices every day, or not necessarily the case? So we'll start with Brother Khan, inshallah, and just move, across.
Assalamu alaikum. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. We are basically Muslim community growing in this country day by day, and we are facing this problem also pretty much regular basis now. As opposed to a few years ago, the problem with the drugs and addiction, what we have seen, now we can see in our practice a lot of Muslim kids. They come with multiple issues, and when we dig into it, we find there is also addiction involved. And a lot of things happening, like even among the practicing Muslim families also. The parents, they go to masjid. The kids also went with the parents from the childhood probably, but when they grow a bit older, like when they become teenage, and I think probably from the influence from the school or outside the masjid, they get influenced with the peer pressure. They sometimes try to get experience, and this way they come into drug world. But first thing, always we find that when they start smoking cigarette, that basically open the door or gateway to the drug world. It doesn't happen overnight or within weeks or months, probably within years. So that things we need to check first. And always remember, the children, they learn from the example, not by lecture. Whatever you say, they probably just listen and next day they forget. But they learn from the example. So usually parents, they have huge role to teach the children, because if they smoke, obviously children will learn that. So that needs to be give up first. So I will not take more time, because I think next you will ask questions different angle, and so with
So
this I would like to.
Is the percentage of Muslim youth who are involved?
Well, I don't have any.
Is it increasing in your view?
It is increasing day by day. I'm seeing in the practice. Last year, whatever we had, I've seen the patients. Yeah, that's why I ask even every Muslim patients actually, no matter what. The way I ask our other patient population, the drug and alcohol question, I never forget to ask them, because I ask, even though I know that they're praying, but I also ask, because it is very important to ask these standard questions when we are doing interview.
True. Thank you. Dr. Osama?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here, joining you again and talking about this very timely topic about the issue of alcoholism among adolescent Muslim kids. And I have 3 points to make real quick. The first point, that the Muslim community outside the Muslim lands is just a reflection from the general Muslim community back home. And if we look back home in the Arab countries or in India, Pakistan, or in other Muslim nations, we will see that there is certain prevalence of alcohol use disorder among Muslim people over there, and by default, the people that they immigrated to the new land will carry the same prevalence, or minor changes will be existing in that aspect. The second important point, that there is a wave of secularism that is spreading back home into the Muslim lands, that's affecting the youth and affecting the young people significantly more than it is affecting the older ones. Secularism is taking people into a very strange position because they keep their Muslim name, they keep their Muslim practice sometimes they fast, sometimes they even pray, sometimes they even put hijab, and they are Muslims from the outside, while from the inside they are secular, and by the word secular means that they say leave what's for God, and leave what's for the state. So they consider the religion is just a ritual or a practice, and then they consider the laws stem from their own self, not from what God dictated. The secularism is pushing people to do what they want rather than to do what the religion is asking them to do. We see that wave back home is rising and the tide is very high, and that reflects also over here. The third point, which also is significantly important, that the pressure from the environment we live in as a society that's not a Muslim society is significantly intense. And the least example for that is my little son. He is 9 years old at that time, now he's 10, and the teacher was asking him, what are you going to do when you turn 21? And he said, I am only 9 years old, how you asking me about age 21? So she asked him, are you going to drink? So his answer was, I will never drink in my life. So she said to him, you should not say that until you reach 21. So I do not say that the teacher was having any kind of malicious intent or anything like that, but I will say that the culture itself is just putting things for people in young heads, that this is the norm, and if you don't do it, then you are in trouble. So based on that, yes, we have a rise into the prevalence of drinking among the Muslim youth here in the United States.
Jazakallah khair. Sister Patty?
Assalamu alaikum. So I tend to look at this issue from a psychosocial perspective. I also have seen that there is an increasing incidence of Muslim youth that present with mental health and substance abuse issues. I see more presentation to the emergency rooms, more psychiatric or substance abuse admissions than in the past. I would also say that Muslim youth living in the United States at this point have additional pressures that other youth may or may not have that are in different cultures living in the United States. For example, Islamophobia, incidents of bullying that occur in the schools, the dynamic of being possibly first or second generation students and being caught between influences in general society and conforming to either parental or religious expectations as well, and going through a normal identity process that is typical of adolescent age, and then having additional pressures put with that can open up the risk or the attempt to cope with life's problems through substance abuse or experimentation. When I work with youth, I often will ask, how did you get introduced to the idea of using something, and what did it do for you the first time you tried that? And because hearing that story will often give a little bit of the motivation, what the person is looking for. Are they either running to something by trying the substance, or are they attempting to run away from something? So there definitely is an increase, along with the increase in many social pressures that our youth and adolescents face now.
Jazakallah khair. Great points by all our speakers. So just to summarize, it seems that we are seeing an increase in the percentage of Muslim youth who are either admitted into ER or psych admissions, or just in general they're having problems with drinking and so forth. And just to again reemphasize the point that Brother Osama mentioned about the culture influence, and maybe this could take us to a second question here. But I think this is something the parents should try to understand, that it's not just about peer pressure, it's about the context of society as a whole, the values of society, this whole idea of freedom of thought and freedom of decision, decide when you get to 21 what you want to do and so forth. And maybe this would take us to the next question. I personally know a lot of parents who would favor to go to a non-Muslim practitioner, psychologist, psychiatric, or even a primary care, versus someone from the community for various reasons, but one of them is because of maybe the fear of embarrassment. This person might be in the masjid with us, we know him, he knows us, or knows the family. So what would your perspective on that be? And we can start with Sister Patty this time.
So I would say that part of the reason for the embarrassment or the reluctance to come to a practitioner who is a member of the Islamic community, stigma is a big part of that. The idea that I might be opening up a personal issue to a member of my community. When I've worked with people in the community or of a local Muslim community, I've had that conversation with people right away. How are you feeling about doing this work with me and with a person that's in your own religion? How will you handle it if we run into each other in the community? How would you like me to handle that? To try to address the stigma issues right away and to hopefully help the person feel empowered to know that I'm attending to the discomfort that they may have, giving the platform to talk about that rather than allowing the anxiety around that to build up, and being able to do planning that will enable the person to say, okay, I've got control of how this person is going to interact or not with me if our paths cross in the community. Or if that's not comfortable, then how can we make sure the person has help from someone who maybe is not in the community but is willing and able to have the cultural competence needed to help the person be able to obtain the service that they need, while also having someone who understands the unique aspects of being a Muslim who has substance abuse and psychiatric needs.
So this is a very important point, that the youth or the adolescents, that they are struggling and suffering from the substance use disorder and alcohol specifically, when they come to see a healthcare provider that is Muslim, that brings immediately in the background of their mind the authority figure at home and bring their parents. And you understand definitely that there is a class and a generation conflict between us as older parents and the young youth, and that gets accentuated when the young adolescent start falling into the traps of drugs or alcohol. And you can imagine easily that at the home there will be a lot of discussions, heated, a lot of emotions, and then they ask him to go see a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a therapist or a counselor, and then he go to see his father or his mother is sitting again in front of him under a different name, under a different title. That brings immediate rejection, immediate resistance, immediate reluctance, and most of the youth that I have seen, the first question that they ask, number one, are you going to be judging me? And then the second question they ask, what is your point in what I'm doing? And then at the end of a long discussion and listening and understanding, then they say, we were afraid to talk because we were thinking that you're going to be exactly like my father. And that is something that is clear fear for everyone. And I think we have to understand this, because when they come to us, then we're able to address the situation from different angles, including the religious aspect. And when they go to someone else that look at this as this is a normal behavior, then they address it in a completely different scenario, and they take the kid away from what they are supposed to know, that this is a sin that you shouldn't do, and this is something that you can stop on your own. And we can help you. If you need medications, we can do that. If you need therapy, we can do that. But this is something that you are struggling with, and we can help you. Rather than the view that is adopted by the culture that drinking is not a big deal, it's just a problem when you get in trouble and moderation and social drinking is not a problem. That's not the Islamic view, and that's not our view. And we should encourage our youth to come to us rather than to go somewhere else so we can help them.
Brother Ahmed, would you comment?
Yeah, actually, it is across the board that ignoring or try to push away the problem about the mental health as well as addiction piece. And it is across the board. But among the Muslim population, I think it is more compared to the general population or in general in the society because of the social stigma and also, all we know actually from the religious standpoint, the alcohol, it is how it is prohibited because it is clearly written in the Quran in 3 spaces. One is Surah Baqarah, verse 219. Another is Surah Nisa, I believe it is probably 43. Another is Surah Maida in 90, which is permanently, the Surah Maida 90 clearly stated that Ya ayyuhal lazina amanu innamal khamru wal maisiru wal ansabu wal azlamu rijsum min amali shaitani fastanibu la'allakum tuflihun. That is the final verdict about the alcohol. That means total prohibition of alcohol and the game of chances and the adultery and this kind of stuff. And you reject all these things so that you can be successful in life. But prior to that, the Surah Nisa, it is also mentioned, that was in one narration said that when some of the Sahabas, including Hazrat Ali radhiyallahu anhu, was praying, and one of the Sahabas was leading the prayer, and Surah Al-Kafirun, reciting in a way it was opposite meaning, and they were, and the Sahabas, they were intoxicated. And in that verse, it was mentioned that Ya ayyuhal lazina amanu la takrabu wa salawatu wa antum sukara. So do not go to near prayer unless you understand what you are saying. And prior to that, Surah Baqarah, ayah 219, it is mentioned that Allah was asking, people will ask you what is about your view about intoxication. And it was clearly mentioned at the time that these are all evil acts, and there may be some benefit, but harm is more than the benefit. And a lot of people actually, they say, well, small amount of alcohol is fine. This is the way. And some of the research also shows that 2.5 teaspoon, which is for medicinal purpose, good for your reducing the LDL cholesterol and increasing the HDL. But these are all the excuses, because you can get that benefit by drinking grape juice, red grape juice, which is not causing intoxication, or other lot of factors, halal food like walnuts, like olive oil. They also mentioned in Quran also, 1400 years ago when it was revealed. Now scientists are saying the olive oil is good, this is good, that is good, all kind of things. But these are all excuses. The first thing I think the Muslim parents, they should know all these things, and they should discuss these things in their dining table when they are having dinner or lunch with them, and talk about these things and give them knowledge. So this is the way we can prevent that, because otherwise, because we are all stigmatized, and because of the mental health and alcohol issues, and Muslims, because majority of people know in this country also, they know that the Muslims, they abstain from these kind of things. But when the things happen in the Muslim community, if they say that, then people will say that they're hypocrite. So that's why they don't want to discuss. And also, another thing brother mentioned, that in the family there is a father, they are authoritative, way they function, they're not opening up with their children, these kind of things. And also they're afraid of, if they explain to them, it will retaliate. So that's where they abstain from, disclosing all these kind of things, refrain from disclosing all these kind of things, and this is the way problem is growing. So I think we should emphasize that this cultural part, and I think in the masajid, when imams, they give sermons, I think once a month at least in every masjid they should talk about this intoxication and these kind of things, because that will help, especially the day of school closure, like when there's a long weekend the Friday sermons when a lot of kids they come. So this is the way we can improve the quality of Muslim life.
Okay, Jazakumullah khairan. So to summarize, some tips for parents is when you approach a counselor, you can ask the Muslim counselor how they disclose information, how would they like to interact in the community if they come across each other. It is important to understand that there is an advantage to deal with a Muslim professional because of the culture and religious aspect and background, obviously. Also, sometimes parents are fearful of being judged by others in the community, or maybe even the professional counselor themselves. And sometimes they feel that this is a reflection of poor parenting that they might have, in the past been part of. Like the brother also mentioned, they might have a fear of hypocrisy, people seeing them as hypocrites. The brother's praying his 5 prayers at the masjid, but his son or daughter is drinking and partying and so forth. So these are some of the things that parents should not put up front. They should not have these preemptive ideas, and rather just seek the proper support. And then one of the panelists mentioned the point about the cultural context again, and how that is not going to be supported by a non-Muslim professional. Things that we consider not acceptable for them, it might be totally fine, and it's okay. We'll help you to cope with it and just move on with your life. And then lastly, another important point that was mentioned by one of the panelists was the whole concept in the Sunnah of prophetic medicine. That is something that obviously a non-Muslim professional would not be able to bring to the table. Things like using ruqya, Quran, hijama, and so forth. So there is definitely an advantage to seek support from a Muslim professional, but again, parents need to be willing to bite that little bullet and get out of their comfort zone a little bit, inshallah. And of course, it doesn't matter if it's a Muslim or non-Muslim professional. Everyone is held by the ethics and the policies of the profession in disclosing information. All right, Jazakumullah khairan. So we're gonna stop here for a minute, see if anyone here in the audience has any questions before we move on, inshallah. If not, we'll just move on with our questions.
I wanted to ask a question, is that when the media is promoting alcohol as a good thing, white wine, red wine, blue wine, whatever, it goes for the heart, it lowers the cholesterol, this and that, a kid can come and say, well, science is saying that's good, why are you preventing it? How do you answer that question? Because they are very scientifically oriented, and they will say, hey, listen, yeah, you talk about things that from 1400 years back, but the current medicine is showing that this is beneficial. How do you answer that question?
I think part of what is necessary is teaching our kids how to be media savvy, which means being able to critically think about when you're reading or watching some information that's coming out in media about this, being able to digest that and find out how is that being published, who is it being published by, is that being published by the tobacco or alcohol industry, manufacturers, different companies that have a vested interest in advertising for those products, or is it coming from a hospital, a medical journal, and being able to critically think about, is this aligned with or is it inconsistent with our values as Muslims, and being able to learn how to digest information with the lens of, is this consistent with everything that we know to be true with our religious and related health practices. Oftentimes our kids are so quickly moving and quickly digesting media information. I mean, this is the age of instant gratification. Our kids are not, just with the nature of the adolescent brain, they're not conditioned to slow down and ask these questions. And advertising depends on people making quick judgments and digesting information without questioning it. So I think from a young age on, we need to really help our kids look at where's the origin of information, and then how do we digest that, and maintaining open communication and planting seeds early on so that kids can feel that they can come to parents with these topics without fear of getting shot down. or in trouble somehow for asking difficult questions.
Brother Sam, would like to.
So the scientific point is extremely important, and the media, as you definitely put it, has huge big impact in everybody's mind. The media is geared towards bringing for people what's considered good and what's considered bad. The media and the school and other avenues is what shape the mind of human beings in the society. And the media is shaping the mind of people, specifically the young people, that alcohol is good. It's the place where people celebrate. When you graduate, you get a bottle of alcohol. When you get married, you get a wine. When you go to Las Vegas, people are raising their champagne and they are laughing. The beautiful girls are drinking. So the media is saying it is good. And kids will look at this and then they will think that this is good. And we have to also have our own kind of media that's very local to our household. So we bring for them the other side of the story that the media never shows. So for example, I work as a physician and I get to see all these sorts of stories right in front of my eyes, and I bring it back to my kids in a very gentle way. One of the stories that sticks in the mind of my kids, pretty clear, very, very sad story, when we lived in Minnesota. And Minnesota goes the winter into 20 degrees below zero, and in a weekend there were college kids and they went to drink. And one of those college girls, she stayed partying and drinking, and her friends dropped her in front of the house at 2 in the morning, and they waited, and then she stood in front of the house to put the key and get in. She was so intoxicated that she actually could not put the key and could not open the door and get in, and the other kids drove away and they went home, and she actually slept in front of the door at 20 degrees below zero. And she actually got frostbite. And we did amputate for this girl multiple fingers and toes, and she got into multiple medical issues. She stayed in the hospital for quite some time till she recovers. This is the story that takes the front in front of my kids, and that's where I tell them, look what alcohol is, and that's what the media will never tell you. And then I show them other stuff that's completely contradicting what the media does. But if someone is more savvy and he really needs to know the research aspect, then we can talk about that scientifically. And this is very interesting because I just came yesterday from a week-long meeting that's only about alcoholism, that is only talking about what does alcohol do. And the session that got people the attention the most was what does the alcohol do for the baby in the womb, in the uterus, under what we call fetal alcohol syndrome. What stunned the people, that the research showed that if the mother did drink before she even gets pregnant, the germ cells, the ovum, becomes changed and becomes impacted. And that can be seen in the baby, despite that she did not drink even during pregnancy. That happens way before. Not only that drinking during pregnancy is dangerous, no, drinking at any time for this woman that she eventually will get pregnant will result in an irreversible change in the methylation for the genes in the ovum that will translate into changes and behaviors in the offspring. This research was shown and it has been replicated, done, and people look at it with a very accepted eye, and everyone got scared from the audience. Then the presenter for this research, all his work is just about fetal alcohol syndrome. He doesn't do anything else. He showed that it goes into the grandkids. If the grandmother did drink, then the offspring of her offsprings, they actually have behavioral changes in their brain. There was an utter silence in the floor, that people were just looking like stunned, kind of like, then what? And no one brought the idea that alcohol should be prohibited, because this is totally against the culture. But what we say, scientifically speaking, it is dangerous by all means. From a media standpoint, we have to have our own kind of local media that we show what's supposed to be shown for our kids.
Yes, media is giving biased information. So obviously, in the Quran also mentioned, there is some beneficial effect, but harm is more than the benefit. So what media does, there is some very little beneficial effect, they magnify that, but they don't talk about the harmful effect at all. They don't talk about history in this country, in the United States of America. 1990, the alcohol was totally banned by proclamation, by law. And from 1919 through 1933, 14 years, it was banned, and there were some capital punishment, 200 something, because of public intoxication. Nobody talks about that. Then what happened in 1933, after Great Depression? The government needed money. So they would get tariff, they would get revenue. So there was some public outcry. So they reversed the law, and 1993 it became legal again. So they don't talk about these things. Until now, alcohol is one of the major killers, because road traffic accident, right? And all the other violence at home and outside, publicly. So there are some involvement of the alcohol and drugs. They don't talk about that much. They probably talk when the incidents happen, but they don't talk over and over. But another thing I always say is this: the publications, what comes, you have to verify who funded them and who were the researchers. Is there any Muslim researchers? Zero. Zero, none. They will not publish even if you show that, because this will not generate revenue for them, for their business. So this is the way, and our main tool is the Islamic knowledge, Quran and Hadith. Even there is a Hadith from Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, when Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked about an alcoholic drink made from honey. In those days in Yemen, they were making alcoholic drink from honey. And we know that honey is very good for health all across in the world. But it is even they are making like Robitussin with honey, right? Probably last 10, 20 years. So 1400 years ago when it was revealed, now they are picking up gradually, this thing is good, that thing is good. It is already mentioned in the Quran. So when at the time Allah's Messenger said, all drinks that intoxicate are unlawful, which means anything that has alcohol is harm to drink, no matter what, it's made from honey or whatever it is. But again, you see, honey, it is pure drink, right? But when you make it in a different way, which can cause intoxication, that is haram. Same thing, grape is a heavenly fruit. But when you make it by fermentation process, make it to intoxicate, then it is haram. So the answer is already in Quran and Hadith. So that is our major strength. But obviously, as a profession, when we work, we cannot discuss all these things in detail. But we try to do it in a unbiased way to convey the message to them, so that they can get the flavor by bringing the history, what was the history in this country in 1919 and 1933, what happened. And nowadays you see, there is a lobby, sir, they are playing games, marijuana, they are doing it. But in this country, in the FDA, only 2 conditions, marijuana they approve. One is chemotherapy-induced pain and nausea. And other things, those who has been suffering from AIDS, they have a wasting of muscles, they cannot eat anything, so generate, increase some appetite. So only these 2 conditions, and those are oral form, capsule, not like smoking. But they, try to play the game with by saying this kind of things. It is legalized, and this legalization also came under pressure also.
Great point. So to summarize, the question was, how do parents deal with arguments by young people about some benefits in liquor, or that a little bit of it is not as intoxicating and so forth. And what the panel has shared is to understand who's funding these advertisements or the programs, understanding the side effects of intoxication. It's not necessarily just while the person is intoxicated, it could be years or even decades before. Like the example Brother Osama gave about pregnant women who might have been drinking in their teenage years, or maybe even their grandchildren are impacted, if I understood correctly. It has, of course, adverse effect on certain organs of the body. I remember when I was younger, I used to have a coworker, and she was drinking every day, and she had liver problems, and She eventually passed away at in her early 30s. But she would drink so much you can smell, she couldn't control it. So those were some of the things to mention. Of course, understanding the history of the whole prohibition of it in this country, the laws and so forth. And it is one of the highest, it is actually the highest reason teenage people die in car accidents, period. So
Yeah.
the highest mortality rate reason or root cause among young people is intoxication. And it's, I think, as big as every other.
But nowadays, I
death
think
cause.
it is overtaken by opioid overdose nowadays.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Very recent months.
So those were some of the points. We'll move on. Any other questions in the hall here? Okay. So a question or an argument that we hear a lot from young people in the community is alcohol is very dangerous, and even non-Muslims, make that clear. But marijuana is not, right? And I know this topic is about alcohol, but is that true? Is the effects of marijuana on the body much less harmful than liquor in general? And if so, how do we guide people to the right understanding? So we can start with Sister Patty.
Okay.
You can start.
What I would have to say about the marijuana issue is that marijuana is very dangerous, and our young people don't know this often because of what they hear in the media and in popular culture. However, one of the things that I have seen, and I think any provider would be able to say, is that both the THC-based marijuana and also synthetic man-made or created chemicals that approximate marijuana, which are sellable over the counter, so to speak, in a variety of places, they have actually led to an increase in ER visits and psychiatric admissions due to chemically induced psychosis. Also, we notice that these chemicals bring about earlier onset psychosis or other mental health issues for people who may have an underlying predisposition that maybe would have come out later in life. It's now coming out earlier. There's also a motivational syndrome that happens with marijuana, and that is even with pure THC marijuana that's not laced with other things, which indicates someone who has a lot of goals in life as a young adolescent. They may find that their goals become less important as a result of this amotivational syndrome. Also, any substance use, including marijuana, changes chemical processes in the brain that mess with sleep, mess with mood, and also change the relationship to previously safe, enjoyable activities, because any form of substance use, including marijuana, really alters the brain's and the body's ability to experience pleasure, happiness, a wide range of emotions. So it's very damaging. And these are all the things that kids oftentimes either deny or don't get told in the various parts of media that make drug use seem so appealing.
Thank you. Anything else anyone would like to add?
So one of the miraculous things about the Quran and about the religion, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that the class or the category of any intoxicating substance is prohibited. So Allah said, إِنَّمَا الْخَمْرِ. Khamr means something that covers the mind. And this is a very good word for intoxication. And Sayyidina Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam said, كُلُّ muskir haram. Muskir means intoxicating. And this is just entering a class of chemicals and a class of compounds into this prohibition. And the things that we know and the things that will come up new, they will be under that class that say muskir, intoxicating. Why this is really miraculous and really eloquent in the religion? Because in the Food and Drug Administration, they regulate what's considered halal and what's considered haram. So they say what's legal and what's illegal. And then they put this under a specific substance. So they say cannabis is illegal. But then the chemists are smart. So they will take that chemical compound and they will make something look like it, but it's not really cannabis. So now this synthetic substance is not really categorized as illegal, so it is legal. Then the Food and Drug Administration runs immediately and take years to study it and then come back and say, this chemical substance is illegal. Then they will make a new one. So we are chasing our tail while Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said from the very beginning, no, anything that's intoxicating is haram. Sayyidina Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam said, كل مسكر haram. Anything that's intoxicating that you know today or you're going to produce tomorrow is haram. One important thing about marijuana when I argue are two factors that people come up with. Number one, that they say this is a plant, this is a natural herb, so why you consider a plant, a natural herb, something that's bad? My immediate response for that, which you're going to laugh at it, is poison ivy is a plant. And if you want to smoke poison ivy, by all means you can do that. And it's absolutely plant, it's natural, it's an herb, you can take it, I am happy for you. And this immediately get the reaction and they get kind of stunned. I say not every plant is good. You can die from certain plants. The word plant is not a free pass. Then the second thing that they say, why some people, they are not getting in trouble and some people get in trouble, so why you make it prohibited for everyone? And my immediate answer for that is the exact same, saying why we have to drive only 65 miles an hour. I actually know how to drive 120 and I'm good in it and I don't get in trouble, but I will still get a ticket at 65 if I go over it, because the law is not made for me alone. The law is made for everybody. So when the law is made for everybody, then some people will find this law restricting for them and some people will find that this is the right thing. But the law has to be the law. So if we put a set limit saying 65 miles an hour, then people that they will drive 100 miles an hour and they are good, they don't get in accidents, they are still breaking the law, despite that this is something that's not getting them in trouble. So if you drink alcohol and you don't get intoxicated, you're still getting in trouble, despite individually there is variability. So marijuana is toxic, is dangerous, is harmful. It's considered a gateway for other drugs. The people start with marijuana, then they graduate to heroin and they go to cocaine. And marijuana is also very dangerous for losing coordination, that you will not be able to drive, you get into accidents, get in trouble, increase the risk for fights, and increase the risk for crime.
Exactly.
Okay, yes, marijuana is obviously harmful. I have some studies. Basically, this was published in Journal of American Medical Association from Neuroscience Institute. It was published in 2016. Why is medical marijuana not a viable prescription option? Brother said, he gets questioned that it is made of plant. Yes, unprocessed plant containing 500 chemicals with 100 plus cannabinoids. Compounds may vary from plant to plant. It may be contaminated with other stuff also. And dosing is not well regulated. So it is not a viable option. Again, about the memory, the cognitive function. Does it affect? Yes. Short-term memory. They said short-term memory, yes. Long-term, there's a mixed data. So we don't know about the long-term memory, whether long-term cognitive function, but short-term, yes. So that means it is affecting your cognitive ability. Then come to the potential effects of cannabis. So it impaired short-term memory, concentration, alertness, judgment, time perception, reaction time, motivation. So these are the things for sure, okay? Tachycardia, that means increased heart rate and cardiovascular, this is for sure. Now the question mark, it is not for sure. Impaired fertility, this is a question mark. Risk of neurodevelopment disorder, it is question mark. So we have enough data to talk about that. This is harmful for cognitive function, especially short-term memory, yes. Long-term, we don't have adequate data. So that is good enough. Another thing, American Society of Addiction Medicine, those who are the regulatory body, or you can say the addiction medicine, their recommendation, cannabis-related products should not be distributed until they have FDA approval. And FDA approval always. Smoking is not an appropriate drug delivery mechanism. So the kids they are talking about the smoking form of marijuana. They are not talking about the pill form of marijuana. Only pill form of marijuana in USA, I've already mentioned that, that two conditions they approved, which is, one is I already mentioned, that is the chemotherapy-related nausea and pain. Another is, I mentioned that HIV-related muscle wasting when they are not able to eat. Okay, now come to marijuana is related to mental illness or not. Yes. Schizophrenia, we know that across the board, 1% population, there is schizophrenia. If you go to Bangladesh, you'll find 1% population schizophrenia, 1% population USA, 1% population in South Africa. But those who are cannabis users, they're double, 2%. So it has also impact on mental health then, correct? Because 1% we cannot change across the board throughout the world. But using marijuana, risk is doubling, 2%. So that is also impacting on mental health. So this, and also, as brother said, it is also mentioned in the Quran, anything is causing intoxication, dependency. So that is haram. So marijuana is, of course, it is haram. Because in those days, probably, in pre-Islamic era, marijuana was not available or not rampant used by the public. So that's why it did not come to the history. But here in the United States also, in 1943, this is a history also, timeline. Marijuana removed from listing as a medication in US pharmacopoeia, 1943. 1851, almost 100 years ago, marijuana listed as a medication in US pharmacopoeia. Many, many years ago, 2000 BC, Chinese emperors recommend marijuana as a medicine. So you see that the trend, 43, it was taken away from the list. In August 11, 2016, DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, declines to reschedule marijuana. So I mean, everything we see that when the lobbyists and there is a public outcry, a group of people. I'm not saying that all the people, of course. So because they are organized, they are spending money and lobbying for that, and they get it done. Because majority of people, they are not aware or they are not participating in the process. So.
Jazakumullah khairan, great point. So to summarize, just real quick, 3 key points. The whole concept of khamr is to intoxicate or cover up the mind, and that includes anything that would cause that, regardless of what it is. And of course we know the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, anything that is even minute, that is haram, is also haram, regardless if it's large or small. So if it's intoxicating us when it's large quantities, it's also haram as small quantities. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, I wanted to share this ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَا تَتَّبَعُوا خُطُوَاتِ الشَّيْطَانِ وَكُلُوا مِمَّا فِي الْأَرْضِ حَلَالًا طَيِّبًا. So not everything is tayyib, as the brother mentioned. Not all plants are harmless. There could be some harm in it, but there could be benefit in it, in other ways. Maybe we could make tires for our cars from these plants, right? But not necessarily consume them. And then the last point I wanted to share here, based on what Brother Ahmed was mentioning, that there are some diseases or illnesses or conditions where we might use these types of plants for recovery or to reduce pain. And this is consistent with the concept in Islam of, أقل الضررين, the least of 2 harms. You have someone who's screaming in pain and aching and they don't have a life because they're in pain. So this could be used as a pain management, treatment or so forth. And then lastly, very important, again, what Brother Ahmed Khan mentioned is the youth who consume these intoxicants are usually using it through breathing, through smoking. Recently, there has been some other types of forms of things that they eat as well. But when we talk about medical treatments, it's more prescribed medicine that has been quantified with doses and so forth.
Let me just interject for 1 second about the route of administration, because this is a little bit serious. The smoking of marijuana has been done for thousands of years. And recently people start eating the plant, and they call this edible. And the edible in Colorado, for example, in 2016, the first year after legalization, they sold 5 million edibles, which is a brownie, a cookie, soda, anything that you can eat. And the state of Colorado is only 4.8 million. So you can imagine that from age 1 day till age whatever you die, there is one brownie or one edible per person. So that's serious stuff. Edibles are dangerous. They increase psychosis more than smoking. They cannot be adjusted the dose because the dose of edible is very difficult to adjust because people take it, they don't feel anything. While when they smoke, they feel the high. So they end up taking another one. They don't feel anything. They take another one, then they become deeply intoxicated, very psychotic. Edibles are very seriously dangerous, more than actually the smoking. The second thing is, in the studies that got the FDA approval for the HIV use of cannabis, in these studies, if you look at them, 29% of these people got psychotic into these medications. And that was reported into the FDA approval saying psychosis is a side effect. So the efficacy of the medicine is not that great, and the side effect is well known for everybody. But it is just the commercial and the money-making market that's pushing this product forward.
And for the benefit of our parents and young people, can you explain what psychosis is? Because maybe most people might not understand.
Thank you for this question, because the term psychosis has been used repeatedly and then it lost its meaning. Psychosis is a very simple word that just say losing touch with reality. Very simple. So when someone is losing touch with reality, he is psychotic. Means someone that believes things that are not real are real, or believe things about himself that are different, or perceiving sensory input that's not existing. So there is loss or detachment of touch with reality. And psychosis goes from the very mild form that someone just feel that he is special, all the way to people that they feel they are God or Jesus Christ, and it goes from people that they just get a little bit of noises to all the way the people that they have actual conversations back and forth with unexisting creatures or voices. Psychosis is unfortunately very common, and a lot of people experience psychosis even undiagnosed, never seen a psychiatrist.
All right, so back to the topic of alcoholism. What should a parent or a family member do if there is someone in their family who is drinking? How should parents react to that maybe sudden discovery? They find a son or a daughter coming back home intoxicated, or they find a bottle under their bed. What would their response immediately look like, and what would you recommend it should be?
I would say if there's an acute intoxication, there's no reasoning with the person. There's really no sense in engaging in conversation at that point. What needs to be done at that point is just ensuring safety. If my child calls me and says, I can't drive, or I need you to come pick me up, I'm going to go pick him up. And I'm going to look at him to see his mental state. If he is intoxicated or she is intoxicated, then I'm not going to engage in conversation. I might just say, I'm glad you called me. We're going to go home, you're going to sleep this off, and we're going to talk in the morning. And then I'm going to monitor to make sure that the person is safe, and I'm going to hold true to what I said. I'm going to be sure to have the discussion, what was going on, what led to this, what were you thinking, what happened, and I'm going to have to try to make myself stay calm so that I can teach my child that you can talk to me about this. We need to figure out how this happened, how it started, assess if there's a problem or was this a one-time thing, and figure out what needs to be done with that. And then also figuring out, how do I need to change the environment to address what's happening? Is it a peer issue? Is it a place, do I know where the person obtained, how they used it, was it with friends? So I need to know some backstory, and then I need to figure out what in my parenting responses might I need to change. Do I need to put some limits or change some parts of my child's routine? And I need to engage my child in doing that, and trying not to be too emotionally reactive, but then also be able to talk about safety concerns and having it all be with the lens of not judgment so much, but safety. That would be the first step. Some of the other things might come after.
Sure, thank you.
So I would like to add to this 2 points that are from a religious standpoint that will be missed in the heat of the moment. Because you can imagine that this is a moment of anger, a lot of emotions coming. And there are two things that will come up immediately in the mind of somebody that is intoxicated young Muslim boy. Number one, the affirmation that what he did is a major sin. And that's something that will come in the mind immediately of somebody like this. But then one major thing that we have to confirm in their minds, that a major sin does not take a Muslim out of Islam. That's something that's really important, because we as Muslim, as Sunni Muslim, we believe that major sins do not disqualify a Muslim from being a Muslim. We are not Khawarij. We are not the people that they consider major sins as you're out from the religion. That's not true. People that they do major sins, they are still Muslims, despite that they did a major sin and they can repent and Allah can accept the repentance. They are not out of the religion. And that's something that's really important at this moment, because you can understand that the mindset of somebody that did this and then sober up, that he did something so huge, and then the shaitan will come immediately and will tell him, you are done, you are out, you're no longer a Muslim, so why bother? Just go do whatever you want. You are going to hellfire anyways. So just get to the full of it. And this is the point where you just have to go back and stand firm and say, it is a major sin, but there is forgiveness if you ask for forgiveness, and it's not taking you out of Islam. You're still a Muslim. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put the punishment for major sins. Because if these people were not Muslims, He wouldn't say punishment. He would just say they are kafir. And you are not. You are still a Muslim. That point, I think, is important in the heat of the discussion.
Jazakallah khair. Brother Ahmed, would you like to add anything?
Well, actually, parents, they can assess, in the first line when they see some changes in their children. As for example, like, relationship with the friends and peers, and whether it has been changing or not. Performance at school, okay, and also whether, kids get called to the school by the school nurse, or these kind of things. I mean, these are the things, and also if there's a changes of emotion, like anger, restlessness, insomnia especially, because young kids, they should have good night's sleep, So if the trend is becoming changing, then these are the, first signal parents, they should explore more. And they should have a, discussion in a friendly manner, not like a judgmental way, not like in commanding way, authoritative way, because they will not tell the things. But if parents, they become friendly with their kids, obviously they will, disclose all these things. And then, once they disclose, obviously, then if they get offered for help, they will accept it. So this is the way I think it should approach. And obviously, Sister Patty said, when there's intoxication emergency, obviously you have to help. You cannot yell at them or abandon them. That will cause more major problem. Also, you need to, especially teenager after 16, 17, when they're driving, you have to observe their driving things also, whether they're reckless or because driving also gives a good, idea about the character.
Yes.
So that also you need to observe that from the beginning, because whether they are showing road rage or this kind of thing. So these are the,
Jazakallah khair. So to summarize, for parents, the advice is you need to be comforting, you need to be understanding, listening. It's not the time to yell at their face because they're not focusing, they're not hearing you, they're not listening. You want to have early signs. So if you're taken all of a sudden by such an experience, that means you've not been very involved in their lives. Like Brother Ahmed said, usually there will be performance issues at school. They're sleeping out, they're staying out late, they're not sleeping well, they got insomnia, or they have emotional issues, they might be secluded in their own rooms. So these are all early warning signs, and if you happen, qadr Allah, to have a problem like that, then the first thing to do is to make sure they're safe, pick them up if they need such a thing, and just for the benefits of the parents and the youth out there, because sometimes we get calls from youth who need to be picked up because their parents don't answer the phone, or they tell them go away. So they can call the hotline 443-429-0095. we have someone who would go pick them up and take them to a safe place or to their home, or we can arrange for a ride, inshallah. All right, so any questions from the audience related to this question?
Just one question. You were mentioning that when you find such a case when your child is intoxicated, they're having a bit of an emergency. You say panic attack or throwing a tantrum or screaming and yelling is that absolute no? Of course, understandable. So can you can you give a message to the parents? Is it any good time for yelling or screaming or throwing a panic attack, or is it always a no? Because this is something that I personally feel there's a misunderstanding widespread among parents that they can throw a panic attack at their kids, saying that this is wrong and you should not do it at all. So can you please reflect on that, inshallah?
There's definitely a time and a place for that.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes what happens is when there's a family emergency like this, emotions can take over.
Right.
And we as parents can sometimes come from a place of reacting from our own emotion rather than what the situation needs and what might be effective.
Mm-hmm.
And I as a parent, if I am, I need consistency in my response to my child, whether it's after an intoxication event or any kind of thing that would concern us as parents, or whether it's just the everyday life stuff. So if I have been hands off as a parent and have not set boundaries and have not been very involved in my child's life, and then I see this happen and I feel like it's a wake-up call, and I suddenly start trying to put the brakes on and being tough and setting these strong boundaries that my child isn't accustomed to, then it may be the time for me to do that, but I also need to recognize that my child is going to respond to my difference in parenting, and they're going to have a lot of feelings about that. So what I really encourage people to do at a young age is to consciously parent and intentionally set boundaries, really consciously think about what our response is to any kind of misstep that our kids might have, so that we can set the groundwork for how do I respond when these real emergencies happen once the children start to get older and the stakes get higher. Because then when I need to have that conversation with my child that I'm concerned for your safety, I'm disappointed that you did this and this is not acceptable, that those are not foreign messages for my child to receive.
I see.
So, because if I do that all of a sudden and I haven't been involved before, it's going to increase my child's anger. They're going to say, well, you didn't care about me before, or you didn't communicate any of this before, so why now?
You were busy with other things.
Right, exactly. So there always needs to be this intentionality of developing the relationship and the parenting style that enables me to, with consistency, give my child the message that I have these expectations for you, and they're all based on your welfare and your safety, and your future as a productive, hopefully happy Muslim citizen and family member. And that I have these expectations not because I want to be a ball and chain for you, but because I want your health and your happiness. And I have a right as your parent to hold you to these expectations, and that's my job, and I do it because I care for you. So absolutely, the limit setting, the conversation, the discussion of expectations needs to be there. It needs to be there not in the immediate crisis. In the immediate crisis, there has to be containment and safety. So.
Jazakallah khair, that was important.
Anyone else would like to add anything?
I agree totally in the term that there is time for emotions, and we as human beings, we are not flat like a board. We have these valleys when we get sad, and we have these little hills when we get happy, we get angry, and that's what a human being is. But anything that will be used in excess will lose its value. So if we're gonna be too spoiling for the kids, then the spoiling will lose its value. Like when I tell my kids, I'm gonna get you a $5 toy, look at me and say, so what? We have so many of this. Or when I yell at my kids every single day, then they know that this guy is crazy because he keeps yelling, and the yelling doesn't mean anything.
Either he's quiet or yelling, so.
So there is a time for everything. And I pick my battles. So I don't really yell at the kids for things. Number one, that's not their responsibility. Number two, I don't yell at them for things that are irrelevant. I yell at them for things that will impact their life and their afterlife. That's it. So I am only yell at them if they intentionally miss the salah, for example, and then they kind of playing games and they hear the azan and they don't care. Then that's time for saying, why you don't pray? This is serious. This is a limit setting. This is firm.
Yeah.
But if they study hard and they get a C, then that's not something you can yell at them for.
Even Allah does not expect us that from us. Even
Right.
if we work hard, Allah doesn't say you have to achieve. Allah says you have to try.
Yes.
So struggle is the actual thing that is required from us.
Exactly.
So subhanAllah. So what you were saying. Well, actually, I would ask you one more thing. So you wouldn't start. Ideally, you wouldn't start a conversation with the screaming and the tantrum. Even in that case, you would start a conversation like a sane human being, and then maybe, if there is some sort of argument or something going on, it can heat up because we're human beings.
So, Sayyidina Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam asked the people around him, the Sahaba, and he said, who is a strong man?
Mhm.
And the people were so surprised, and they said, Ya Rasulullah, the strong man is the one that wins in wrestling. Then Sayyidina Muhammad said, no. The strong man is the man that controls his emotions, controls his anger, right? So when something happens, and then you look at me and you say, are you yelling at your kids? That asks the question, are you strong enough to restrain your horses? Or your horses ride you instead of you ride them?
Right.
So getting the heat of the moment is totally unpredictable, and then you have to manage it at the time comes, and you pray to Allah that you don't lose by losing your ability to control your anger.
Right.
But we all as humans, we lose our anger, absolutely,
Yes.
of course.
All right, so we have time for two more questions. The first one, if a family has a member who is an alcoholic addict and needs treatment, what are the options available? What are the different styles of treatment? And are there any styles that are not compatible with the Muslim, beliefs? So we can start. You want to start?
No, I think brother, he's an addiction specialist.
Okay. Tell them.
Thank you. So I do work in I did work in addiction treatment places, and all my work is just addiction research. And I can tell you that there are two completely opposite direction philosophy for addiction. One of them is looking at addiction as a brain disease. Like some people get stroke, some people get multiple sclerosis, then they get addiction. So it's just a biological disease in the brain. And that's in one end of the spectrum, while in the other end of the spectrum, the people that they say addiction is a complete choice, that you completely make the choice by yourself, and it has nothing to do with the illness. This is not a disease. Those two are actually having some truth to them, because people do make the choice to experiment with a drug. But when they start experimenting with a drug, they don't have a choice when they become addicted. Exactly like you see a banana peel in the street. You have a choice to step in it or not. But if you step in it, you don't have a choice that you're gonna fall in your head. that's it, it's a banana peel. And I tell them that example and they laugh, because I tell them you did make the choice to experiment with a drug. But then once you experiment with a drug, then that's it. The philosophy that's adopted in the United States is that the disease is addiction, and abstinence is the treatment, 100% abstinence. And that's consistent with the culture of the Muslims, that abstinence 100% is what's required. There are people that they consider social drinking as accepted treatment. So they say, instead of binge drinking or heavy drug use, you go to moderate use or social drinking. This is considered as a minority, and it's not the mainstream, simply because there is really no way that someone will be a drug addict or an alcoholic will be able to stop after the first drink. Once they will start, they will continue all the way. Remember, somebody stepped in the banana peel, he cannot stop until he hit the ground. So that's exactly what happened. We as Muslims tell people you need to stop this completely, that's not your friend. And they tell their people you need to stop this completely, because you can't stop once you start. So if somebody is struggling with addiction, we can tell him that you made a choice to start, but you could not make a choice to be an addict. And you need to get treatment, and the treatment is requiring that you abstain completely and you never go back to this again.
Anyone else would like to add anything?
I would say one of the, in terms of treatment, a lot of times families won't know exactly what treatment looks like, and that's scary. For people to, everyone knows this general concept of treatment or rehab, but people don't always know what happens inside of treatment, and that's like mysterious and scary for some people. So, oftentimes what you'll get in terms of treatment is it all starts with an assessment. If you go anywhere and you're seeking treatment for alcohol or any kind of substance use, there's an assessment that happens, and it looks at such things as how often is the substance being used, what kinds of consequences has it resulted in. It looks at the various domains of a person's functioning in life, school, work, social, family, financial, physical, and mental health. And then from that and the person's level of impairment, then it gets determined what level of treatment a person should have. That could be anything from an outpatient meeting with a person who has experience dealing with substance abuse. It could be a program where a person meets with group therapies and support groups, as well as counseling for a few hours, a few days a week. For people who are really unable to stop without 24-hour supervision, or if they need a medically based support in order to stop using the substance because they're using so much that they've become physically dependent, that could be a short-term hospital stay to help detoxify the body and the brain from the effects of the substance and to help stabilize. For a person who's truly addicted, the treatment needs to be long-term, and there needs to be a routine where the person's time is structured and they have been able to work with their family and professionals to be able to figure out how did this problem start and what is that a bid to replace? Is it poor coping skills? Did it start out with peer difficulties? Is there something that person is either running towards and trying to fill or running away from and trying to avoid as a mechanism of substance abuse? And the treatment all centers around that and in trying to help the person find healthier and for us more halal ways to cope with things. So.
Okay, great. So if I understood, to summarize, treatment is not necessarily something to be worried about or scared. I mean, it starts with an assessment, and then there could be different levels from outpatient all the way to inpatient, including group therapies or confidential therapies. Now, just for the sake of the community, can we explain what addiction means? If someone goes out every weekend with his friends and he drinks till 2 in the morning, he comes back, and this cycle repeats for a year, is that considered addiction, or the families should just think it's going to go away at one point? And the second question is, do we always have to have intervention, or would these types of issues just disappear by themselves? So, anyone would like to start?
Well, definitely the scenario what you say, that is definitely addiction, because if it is happening regular basis, and also it is affecting the social, occupational, and family life, that this is obviously an addiction. And intervention should start from the beginning, because if you cannot stop this revolving door, these things will continue, and it will escalate to a point. It will be life-threatening situation and ruining the entire family and eventually the society. So that's why from the intervention should start from the very beginning. And I already said that it is not just by lecturing. Family, they should set an example so that they learn. The kids, teenagers, this age group, they learn from the example, not by just lecturing and saying. A lot of time I have seen affluent Muslim family, okay, they are practicing religion, praying, salah, these kind of things. But when they're social gathering, in the party, even in the office, when they arrange some party, they serve wine. You don't have to, because this is our identity. We are Muslim, we don't drink, this is a totally prohibition, and I will not serve that. You don't have to. So now you are, say, that family members are praying, everything is doing, but the kids when they see, when my father arranging party, serving wine in that party, that means it's okay probably. I'm not drinking, but no. So these are the things also we have to strictly follow according to Islamic rules and teaching. And we have to set an example that I believe that and I will do that. So this is the way. But otherwise just giving lecture, lip service, it doesn't work that way because they learn from these set of examples.
And kids are curious, they're going to ask questions. I mean, if you go to a restaurant and you have your 6 or 7, 8-year-old child there, and they see something unusual in these fancy glasses and all, they're gonna ask, what is that? Why is that bottle being brought to that person's table or whatever? And we don't need to teach our children to talk negatively about things or necessarily to judge something that's not in their culture, but we need to let them know we don't do that.
Right.
Our religion prescribes that we don't take these things. And the kids are gonna ask why. And then we can talk about, well, because it has a harm that can come with that. And then they will know that from an early age. And we always as parents have to be listening for the opportunity to plant these seeds with our kids and to give them socially responsible, religiously responsible education on these topics. And they give us the opportunities to provide that all the time because they're very curious and they ask questions. So we have many, many opportunities to address these issues as long as we're consciously taking the time as parents.
Okay, would you like to share?
So addiction is a very broad term that is simply saying there is something that I like and I want more and I can't stop. So there are 3 words that you need to fulfill. Number 1, you need to like it. Number 2, you need more. Number 3, you can't stop. And that can apply to my little kid when I give them candy. They just say, I love it, I want more. And then I say enough, they say, I can't. So that applies to them. That applies to me when I go to work and I continue working till midnight. And then you tell me, come home. Then I say, I like it, I want more, I can't stop. Addiction is a broad lay term, but when it starts impacting life, and when it starts impacting health, and when it starts having these negative consequences, then we start saying, here we are facing a disease, rather than just facing something that we like, and we want more, and we can't stop. That consequence, that negative impact, is where we put the line, and we say, if you go party every night, and then you come home, and you get to work next day, your performance is excellent, by definition, we would not consider you an addict. But you have trouble, because this is not going to continue like that.
So the message to parents is, yes, addiction is a reality. It doesn't have to be someone who's collapsing in front of you. It could be a family member who goes out every week or whatever. We should not be shy to seek intervention. As a matter of fact, we have to. It's a duty upon us as Muslims and as parents. And like Sister Patty said, the key here is to be educated from early on. We have a lot of opportunities as parents when our kids are still young and they start to inquire about things around us. These are our golden nuggets to kind of open up some of these topics, age appropriate, of course, and explain it to them in a way like was mentioned earlier that is scientific, because this is kind of the society we live in, and also related to their beliefs. All right, I think we have one last question here, and then we will open up for the floor again. If there is someone who went through intervention, received recovery, is there anything special that the family needs to do after that point? So now they're recovered, they're living with their family at home. Any special considerations they need to take into account? We can start with Sister Patty.
Okay, I would say always kind of checking in and just communicating support. And not forgetting that there's been this issue, but also, as parents, we can get so tempted to constantly bring up, well, you remember when this, that, or the other happened. And oftentimes that can be very guilt-inducing, and it can create some issues. So I think when, if we have a young person who's, gotten into this trouble and then they restabilize and kind of develop a new sense of normal, we as parents need to be a part of that new sense of normal. And if we see that the person may be kind of setting themselves up to go back into what we would consider a risky situation. We also need to kind of contain our own emotion about that and be available and kind of show that we're there to talk with the person through that. Well, what do you think is going to happen if you go to this party or if you do A, B, or C? How does that fit in with what you've been through to kind of restabilize and get to where you are now? What might be another thing we can do instead? So always being there as a sounding board, a support, helping a person make sure they're taking care of themselves. Oftentimes with addiction, we see, you know, a person's nutrition might not be good, their sleep habits, their physical energy level, their general health. Oftentimes if we see changes in those things, that can be a warning sign that, you know, maybe this person needs a little bit of extra attention. And so just being a part of that, the new sober routine, is very effective. Sometimes people need another person around them to kind of check in and, you know, be that external observer to see if there's, you know, anything that's saying maybe we need to give some increased attention to that person's self-care so that they can stay abstinent.
One important thing that I encourage my patients to do is when they reach that level of sobriety is to try to help others. And that brings a whole lot of dimension that they feel that they are actually helping other people to achieve sobriety, and that feeds positively into their self-esteem and brings the sobriety as something that they treasure and they adore, and they keep going to other people and telling them, I was in your place and I can help you and you can get out of this. That gives them a lot of protection against going back and relapsing. And I can't really affirm enough, and I can't really say it repeatedly more than what you said, that we can't shame them. Any kind of trying to shame them will bring them back to addiction. Sayyidina Muhammad عليه الصلاة والسلام said, لا تعينوا عليه الشيطان. Do not help the shaitan over him by shaming the person. So when they reach this treatment, sobriety, then we support them and we encourage them. Then we tell them, stay, try to help others. That will keep you in your sobriety.
Yeah, I mean, this is addiction, it can be recurrent. So the goal should be prevent that recurrence. A lot of time you will see that they switch from one addiction to another. That is also important thing we need to explore. If they are switching their addiction from alcohol to another form of drugs or not. Nowadays you can see that we are getting addiction to internet addiction, cell phone addiction. Though it is not a diagnosis or any criteria in the DSM-5, but probably maybe within 10 years it will come, because when we will see more problems. So obviously we have to keep an eye on that the person maintaining that sobriety, abstain from drinking alcohol, that they don't get into another addiction. So that's important. So we need to explore that also.
So I think what I heard is make sure we avoid the triggers for the initial addiction. You know, sometimes it could be in the house itself. Contain emotions, don't shame the person who has recovered. And a very important point, lastly mentioned, is sometimes people recover from one addiction and they switch over to different. We see that amongst Muslim youth. They recover from marijuana and they switch over to alcohol, or vice versa, thinking that one is less harmful than the other. Or they start with, you know, marijuana and they switch over to cigarettes. Things like that. So that concludes these questions here. Again, we'll open the floor if anyone has other questions here in the audience. Let's see, is there anything online that you got?
Yes, I have a question about prevention of either alcoholism or drug use. How, like, parents can start that from young, you know, age of the children, and how important the role of faith, like teaches them, like, you know, vision from the Quran, explain it for them, and have some time, you know, like the parents would sit and let them know how important that, and how, like, there are different ways also the parents can do in the young age to prepare them and not to wait until it's getting late.
Okay. So we only have 1 minute for each question, inshallah. So if anyone would like to address that one. So techniques for preventing addiction from a younger age, and how does faith play a role in that?
I would just say that the more you talk to the children, the more you open their minds, and the preemptive strikes are always better than prevention. So you always have to bring the topic and put it in front of them, make it as spicy as you can, so like that it can attract their attention, and bring the stories that will stay with them. And the more we leave the kids to the media, the more we lose them. So less time for TV, less time for things that are really not in our faith, our religion, and engage them into the discussion that you want them to know about, and that's something from very young age.
Any other questions?
So, it's a two-part question. The first is just like with alcohol, if you don't drink too much, you don't get alcoholic, or you don't get drunk. Is the same thing true with marijuana also, that if you take a little bit, you smoke a little bit, you're not drunk? That's the first question. And the second is, how do you explain that, like even from the chronic point of view, that anything that is intoxicant in large quantity is prohibited, even in small quantity, right? So that is the equation for that. But if I don't get drunk, and I don't get into car accident, and I don't kill other people, then what's wrong in taking a little bit? I'm not asking this question for myself, but I have a lot of Christian friends. And in the Bible, it very clearly says that drinking is okay as long as you don't get drunk. And my answer was always that you cannot control that like a gambler, right? An addiction, and you can say that, okay, I'll just drink 2 glasses and I'm a social drinker, I will stop. But if that's true for somebody, is that okay? Because I'm not getting into the bad part of that.
Well, when you mentioned about the Bible, I go, if it comes like that, I don't bring a Bible and other things right away, but if they ask things, well, the alcohol in the pre-Islamic era also, it was not banned until the second Hijrah. It was banned after the Battle of Badr. Because in those days, it was in the Arab culture, alcohol, dancing, all these things, it was not prohibited. There was no clear direction. So Bible came many years before Quran came. So obviously it was not prohibited. But when Quran came, initial revelation, it was not prohibited, but after second Hijrah, after Battle of Badr, it became prohibited because a lot of incidents happened. When there's a problem happened, then solution came. In those days, they did not see the problem in that culture, probably, or it was ignored. We don't know that part, the historical part. So whatever I have shallow knowledge, based on whatever I have, we see the chronological history, and based on that I try to explain, if they ask. But I don't proactively explain that. So that part I think you can explain very clearly about the why Bible. In Bible it was not prohibited. Even in the Quran, when it was first revelation, when it started beginning, it was not prohibited. But after second Hijrah, after Battle of Badr, it was prohibited. And there are 3 verses: Surah Baqarah 2:9 I mentioned, and Surah Nisa, and final version Surah Maida. It is clarified entirely. So that means it is totally prohibited. So that part I think you can explain this way. Then what is the other question? The small part.
Marijuana?
Okay, marijuana also, I explained some data also. It has definitely detrimental effect. Now the question is, after one puff, well, you are not becoming an addictive person, but you are stepping into danger. So if you keep on moving, obviously these are the substance, because brain rewarding the system, it will want more and more. This is the way you will get addicted to it, because your body will develop tolerance. Eventually you get dependent on that, and that you will get completely addicted to it. So let's not go to that route, because we know that it has more harm than some benefit. Even in the US, FDA only approved for 2 conditions, and those are all pill form also. Not smoking, not spray, nothing like that. So it also gives you answer. Another thing, if they ask about the plant, these are the contaminated with the stuff, 500 chemicals, and most of them has harmful effect. So what is the point? It will give immediate gratification. Even with the alcohol, I say, people, Yeah, for that moment when people are drinking, it relaxes them, obviously. But it has some cumulative effect. It also, there is a part of the brain called locus coeruleus. It triggers that part to release norepinephrine, which is one of the chemicals that causing anxiety. And I also tell them that you will see that most of the alcoholic people, they are very anxious because it has continuous triggering factor, making them anxious to a point they are always restless and anxious. So it did not happen overnight, but it happened over the period of time.
Jazakallah khairan. Any other questions from the audience here? Are there any questions online? No comments? Okay. All right, so to summarize our discussion, the bottom line, I think, for parents is be part of your children's life early on, as early as you can. There's no shame if we have such problems in our families. We should not shove them under the rug because they're not going to go away. We should seek intervention. There are advantages to seek Muslim intervention because of many reasons that we mentioned. But if you're still not that comfortable, get some intervention, whatever it is, inshallah. I want to thank our panelists, Jazakumullah khairan, for spending the time with us and sharing your experience, inshallah. I believe the video will be online as well, so if anyone wants to refer to it again, Jazakumullah khairan.
Thank you so much for organizing this event.
Thanks for having us.
It's nice meeting you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Same here.
See you, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Hey, brother, how are you?
Assalamu alaikum.